Dale Little here with Rescue America Ministries, Chesnadia, Romania. And we're looking at Daniel chapter 2. We've talked about in the last portion about the decree that Nebuchadnezzar had sent out to have all the wise men killed in Babylon because they were not interpreting his dreams properly. In other words, they really didn't have the power that they claimed they had in being able to interpret dreams and things like that. Some of it was hit and miss, and the king knew it, and he was going to prove it. And so this time he tells them, well, if you can tell me the dream, then I know that you can tell me the proper interpretation. But if you can't tell me what I dreamed, then you're an imposter anyway. So he was ready to have all the wise men and astrologers, all these advisors killed. And until they came to Daniel, and Daniel came before him and said he could interpret it. And Arioch, the king's captain of the guard there at the king's palace, I said he took some risk in allowing Daniel to come before the king and asking him to delay the executions. But he also, like I say, took a risk. There was some chance of gain for him, and it paid off because he knew Daniel well enough by this time that he could be trusted. And sure enough, when Daniel came through, it was in verse 25, we'll see that he was able to take credit for it. And so we'll pick up, we left off last time as Daniel had asked for extended time for he and his friends to seek God's will and come back and interpret a dream for Nebuchadnezzar. And we'll see in verse 17, it says, and then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. We know better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's strange, but that's the way we've been taught by kids, and that's still the popular names to me because that's what I remember better. Being taught that from kids, something about those names. But we still remember Daniel by Daniel, but we remember his three companions as their Babylonian names. But anyway, Nebuchadnezzar was unknowingly following God's plan by opening the door for Daniel to introduce him to the only true God. Excuse me. Nebuchadnezzar worshipped, and most of the kings of that area, or the people of that area, they served and believed and worshipped a variety of gods. And so Daniel now is going to have the opportunity to introduce him to the true and living God, Jehovah God. In verse 18 it says, and they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And listen to this. This is something we need to be aware of. I said when I started this study that one of the things I loved in it was the practical applications that we saw in it. But here's the other thing, though. And, of course, there's prophecy. But here's the other thing that I put personally ahead of the prophecy and maybe maybe before even the practical lessons. But that is the sovereignty of God. We see the sovereignty of God throughout the book of Daniel. Listen to this. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He receiveth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. So here Daniel is saying that God's the one that sets up kings and takes them down. If God puts somebody in place, man better be careful in trying to bring them down. Now, I'm not saying there's never a time to do that, and sometimes that's God's means of putting His person back in place. But you better be sure before you go meddling and doing things like that, trying to bring down a leader, someone that's put in charge. If they're God's anointed, then you're going to be in trouble. It's and I say God's anointed. Just our leaders in America, our president, our representatives. God never required that they be perfect. They're not. As somebody said, we're not electing a pope. We're not electing Sunday school teachers necessarily. It'd be nice if they are, but it's people that lead us in the right direction, make the right decisions for the country, and things like that. So, Nebuchadnezzar was a wicked king, but God used him to bring judgment because of the wickedness of His people in Jerusalem and in Israel, and the kings that were there. And in a sense, their wickedness was worse. You look at Ahab, about as wicked as you could get. He and Jezebel. So here these other kings. Nebuchadnezzar comes in, and the Bible at one place calls Nebuchadnezzar God's servant. And he later calls Cyrus his servant. Cyrus also was a pagan king. And so, we don't have to have perfection in a leader to know that God may have set that leader in place. And because it said he removeth kings and setteth up kings. God's in control. If you think this world, if it looks like it's spinning out of control, it's not. It may appear to that. But God is ultimately still in control. Now, one of these days, He's going to take His hand off of it, and it's going to fly apart. But by that time, His people will be safe. Verse 23, it says, I thank Thee and praise Thee, O Thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desired of Thee, for Thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. And therefore Daniel went into the Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, Destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show them to the king the interpretation. And so Daniel goes on in verse 25. It says, Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste. No time to waste here. And said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah. What did I say before? That Arioch had a chance to either, he's taking a risk. It could be dangerous if Daniel didn't come through, but here Daniel comes through and he takes the credit. I have found a man. All he did was just, Daniel brought it to him when he went to get Daniel and his friends. And so it's like he really did something in finding Daniel. And in a sense he did. I'm not taking everything from him, but he was going to sure let the king know that he was responsible. I'm sure he was rewarded well. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers and magicians, soothsayers, show unto the king. In other words, they can't show it to you. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. And before we go on, I think it's amazing that here Daniel is telling the king that God is about to reveal to Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. I question, why that. Not question, God's purpose and what He's doing, but I just don't know the answer why God was given Nebuchadnezzar here privy this wicked king as to what was going to happen in the latter days. Other than maybe to give this king a chance to fully follow God himself and not all these other gods. I don't know. But he did give him that. He said that to the king, that maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. And so he tells him, as for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter? And so the king had been contemplating these things. And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. So here is Nebuchadnezzar was contemplating on these things, and so that's when God gave him the dream, and maybe that's the reason God gave it to him. He'd been thinking about it and pondering it, and so God steps in and gives him that. In verse 30 it says, but as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. So God is even gracious. You hear this wicked king. Today, today's the 28th of November, 2019, which I'm doing this. And we have such a hatred brewing against our president there in the United States. And here we have a wicked king, Nebuchadnezzar, and God's has mercy on him and compassion on even this wicked king. God's not like man. Thank God. He's not even like me, thank God. My patience wears thin much quicker than God's does. If it's up to me, things be a lot different, and unfortunately, there'd be a lot more souls going to hell than what there will be, with God in charge. Because I wouldn't have the patience with them to wait and see if they're going to turn, and I'd be a lot more hasty in doing some things. Matter of fact, I may not even pass the muster. I knew for my own regulations or whatever, my own rules. But at any rate, God has mercy, and here's wicked king, and that he's revealed this thing that this king might know the thoughts of his heart. And thou, king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, the breast and the arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part iron and part of clay. And thou sawest still that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them in pieces. And then was the iron, the clay, and the brass, and the silver, and the gold broken into pieces together, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. And that's one of the places I said, and there's other places in this book of Daniel here, that I said that I was very intimidated when I first started, and still am to some extent. There's still a lot of deep things in the book of Daniel, but I trusted God to help me with it, and I had no problem when I started through the book of Daniel the first time I did many years ago. I took it with attitude. Well, I teach what I know. And as I come to areas that I don't know, if I just don't know, then I just say I don't know. I don't have a problem with that. There's a lot of things I don't know. But God has shown me a lot of other things I do know. And so I, dwell on those. But I was amazed as I got into the book of Daniel and got studying it more and more, of how often that the interpretation is given right after the dream or vision and things like that that were given there. And still some things to figure out sometimes, but many times it's all done. In verse 37, it says, "Thou, O King, art a King of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory." And we see that there again it says, "The God of heaven hath given you this." And, people would argue for that today. A lot of Christians would. Well, a lot of non-Christians would. You can't, God don't have anything to do with him. He's too wicked. This can't, God wouldn't put anybody like that in place. Well, he did, and he does. "And whatsoever the children of men should dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given unto thy hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold." So I have a chart that I may show later on. I'm not sure how, if I get it up here or not and how it will come out. But that depicts the different chapters and different ways that these different kingdoms are mentioned. And I think one says that, I'll close with this. Time's about to get gone. That it tells which kingdom was depicted by different animals and different things like that in the book of Daniel in some of the visions. And I notice that in this particular one that the world empires, it says, the Babylonian, in Daniel chapter 2, verses 31 through 45, that is depicted as the head of gold. And in Daniel chapter 7, then that same kingdom is depicted as a lion there. And we'll see that as we go through the different images are used. But if you really want to get technical about it, the head of gold was not necessarily the Babylonian kingdom. It was, but more specifically, it was Nebuchadnezzar himself. Because that's what Daniel said, "Thou art, thou, O king, are this head of gold." And so, it's not that improper, out of the realm to say that it represents the kingdom of Babylon, because that's the empire that Nebuchadnezzar did rule. But just wanted to point that out. And before we go on any further, like I say, we get into that. No, our time's gone on this one. And so the Dale Little Rescue American Ministries, Tesnadilla, Romania.